All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to This Explainer, where today we are unpacking a seriously fascinating narrative from our source material that basically challenges everything we think we know about ancient history. We're diving into a very specific, deeply complex claim: the idea that an invisible workforce built the ancient world's most impossible structures, and they did it in absolute silence. It's this wild story that weaves together ancient scripture, massive architectural anomalies, and even modern physics. So we're going to break down its arguments and see exactly how this intricate narrative comes together. The source kicks things off with a massive question, one you've probably debated yourself. Who really built the ancient world's most impossible structures? Now, when we look at structures that completely defy modern engineering, the usual debate bounces between human ingenuity, some kind of lost ancient high technology, or, extraterrestrials. But according to the text we're examining, the answer isn't aliens at all. Instead, it points to a specific historical figure, the real King Solomon, exactly as he's described in the preserved traditions of the Quran and the Bible.
To see how Solomon fits into all this, let's look at Section 1, an unusual prayer. The whole narrative hinges on this one highly unusual request. Solomon, who is already this incredibly wealthy and powerful king, asks for something completely unprecedented. The source makes a huge distinction here. He wasn't asking for more gold or bigger armies or even for his legacy to live forever. No, he was asking for a kingdom that was utterly different in kind than anything seen before or since. He literally wanted authority over a realm that humans simply do not have access to.
And the response to that prayer? Totally unprecedented. Scripture claims he was actually granted these extraordinary gifts. We're talking control over the wind, the ability to understand animals, but the big one for our explainer: absolute command over the jinns. To manage all this, he was given a divine seal. Think of it as a master key that granted him absolute, sanctioned authority over this hidden, invisible realm. Which brings us right into Section 2, the invisible workforce. To ground this supernatural claim in the real physical world, the source points straight to the Levant, specifically the megalithic foundation stones at Baalbek in Lebanon. Just consider the staggering weight for a second: 800 to 1,200 tons. And these were cut with sheer precision and moved from a quarry over a kilometer away. To put that into perspective, our absolute best, most advanced modern cranes operating right now at maximum capacity would really struggle to lift 800 tons. The source argues these impossible stones are the physical footprint of an extraordinary, non-human labor force. And that workforce? According to the text, it's the jinns. The source describes them as beings created from smokeless fire, existing on a frequency of reality that basically sits right beside our own, making them completely invisible to human eyes. The claim here is that these massive ancient arches, statues, and basins absolutely weren't built by humans pulling ropes. They were built by this highly capable, dimension-crossing workforce operating strictly under Solomon's divine mandate. This illustrates a really brilliant philosophical argument from the source, drawing a hard line between divine authority and occult magic. Think of it like this: magic is what humans do when they try to reach into a world they were never given permission to enter. It's like a thief breaking into a house. But Solomon, he wasn't a thief. He was literally handed the master key by the owner of the house. His power over the jinns wasn't sorcery, it was specific, authorized, divine command. But here is where the dynamic gets incredibly tense. Solomon knew perfectly well his workforce wasn't loyal to him as a guy. They didn't work out of love or respect. They were loyal only to the divine frequency of his seal. Meaning, the jinns were fundamentally shackled, highly productive, and absolutely seething with rage. They hated being confined and were essentially just counting down the seconds, waiting for this human king to die so they could be free.
And that underlying tension sets the stage perfectly for Section 3, the death of a king.
The narrative paints this incredibly vivid, kind of eerie picture. Solomon was old. He was out overseeing his vast construction sites, watching the jinns do all the heavy lifting of stone and metal just like he had for decades. And then, leaning on his staff, with no dramatic thunder or big fanfare, he just quietly died. His body remained propped up, standing exactly as it was when he was alive. This is where this story gets totally wild. Unaware of his death, these incredibly powerful ancient beings just continued their grueling forced labor for an entire year. For 12 months, they hauled stones and built temples, completely terrified of a man who was already dead. The illusion of his authority held them captive well after his soul had departed.
And how was the spell finally broken? By the absolute smallest of creatures. A tiny, almost invisible woodworm spent that entire year just slowly eating through the staff Solomon was leaning on. Eventually, the wood's structural integrity failed, the staff snapped, and the king's body finally fell to the ground. Only then did the jinns realize they had been slaving away for a corpse. The source highlights this specific moment as a massive theological statement. It's saying that despite all the jinns' incredible power, their speed, their ancient age, their ability to cross dimensions, they are fundamentally limited. They are completely blind to the unseen. They cannot read the soul, and they couldn't even perceive that the life had left the man standing right in front of them. It's a profound reminder of the absolute limits of purely physical or dimensional power. But once Solomon fell, the jinns were finally free. Welcome to Section 4, Ancient Information Warfare. So the jinns are free, and they are furious. But they weren't all powerful. They couldn't just magically erase the scriptures that documented their enslavement. So instead, they executed this brilliant disinformation campaign. They hid books of magic beneath the temples they had built, actively rebranding Solomon, stripping away his divine authority to frame him as the world's first great occultist. In doing so, they created these counterfeit maps, false grimoires, and spells, knowing humanity would eventually find them and try to copy the king. To back this up, the source points directly to explicit scriptural references, like this verse from the Quran. The text explicitly clears Solomon's name, flat out stating he was not the one practicing dark arts. It says it was the rebellious entities, the devils, who spread magic to deceive people. The source argues this is proof of how Solomon was falsely transformed into an occult idol, tricking humans into making deals with the very beings he had locked up. So why does a 3,000-year-old story matter to us today? Let's get into Section 5, the modern Solomon Protocol. The source traces a really fascinating timeline here. Starting from Solomon's death around 1000 BCE, those counterfeit maps the jinns left behind were eventually discovered. They made their way into medieval occult grimoires, got picked up by secret societies like the Freemasons and Rosicrucians in the 1700s, and according to the source, this unbroken chain leads straight to today's modern techno-elite in 2026. Specifically, it points at megaprojects like CERN and the rollout of smart cities. Which brings us to one of the most provocative claims in the entire explainer. The source argues that CERN, the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, is basically acting as a modern-day jinn portal. It notes that if you listen to the off-record language and read the private papers of some of these physicists, they aren't just talking about standard particles anymore. They talk about piercing the veil between dimensions and accessing states of matter that frankly sound remarkably like the ancient texts hidden under Solomon's throne. Furthermore, the source suggests we are seeing this exact influence in our daily lives through urban planning. We're seeing hexagonal grids, highly specific acoustic designs, frequency-based architecture. The claim is that modern smart city designs mirror Solomon's ancient construction projects with an uncomfortable level of precision. The implication? The very same unseen architects who built Baalbek are essentially consulting on the digital and physical infrastructure of our world today. But here is the critical flaw the source points out regarding this modern elite pursuit. They are missing the core component that made Solomon's seal work in the first place, a concept called fitra. Fitra is basically the original nature, the factory setting of the human soul, which is inherently aligned with divine submission. Solomon had the power because he actually submitted to the source of that power. The modern pursuit wants the power, but absolutely none of the accountability. And the explainer offers a very stark warning about this. There is no safe mode. If you attempt to run this Solomon protocol, if you try to reach into this hidden, frequency-based world without the authorized divine submission that Solomon had, you aren't actually commanding the hidden world. You're just being used by it. You are walking completely blind into a 3,000-year-old trap set by beings who are far older and far more cunning than we are. Which leaves us with this final, profound question posed by the source material. Can you really wield the power without the submission? It's an incredibly compelling look at how ancient scripture, structural anomalies, and modern technology might all be woven together. Really challenges us to deeply consider the true cost of power and the legacy of the structures we are building today. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating narrative, and always keep questioning what you know.